everyone. Hello, welcome. Welcome to the second session in the 2026 Child Abuse Prevention Month webinar series. This is also known as CAP Month. There are many months we are celebrating. In this session, we're going to be talking about Child Abuse Prevention Month. And so as we allow friends to make their way in, to come on in, I have a question for you. This session is about lived experience. And I was wondering a little bit about yours. I'm curious, what is the most game-changing advice you received that helped you with the role that you have today? Think about the job that you have. Think about the role that you have. What was a piece of game-changing advice that you received? Maybe from a colleague, maybe from a mentor, maybe it was from a family. What is the game-changing advice you received that really helped you with the job that you do today? I'm going to ask you to drop it into the chat. This is where we can share our experiences together. We are also going to begin in just about 60 seconds, so your responses also help to make sure that our chat works appropriately. So we're asking, what is a piece of game-changing advice that you received that helps you with the role that you have today? All you can do is the best you can do. Angela says, show up and be excellent. That's your job. Yeah, I like it. Leave expectations at the door. So be open-minded. We plant seeds and it's our client's job to nurture the seed. Take breaks and self-care. That's a good one. Remind yourself why you're doing it. It's all for the kids. Forgive yourself. Do better next time. These are so, look at all these pieces. Treat others as you want to be treated. Yes, breathe and be patient. That's good life advice for all of us. This is what who you are is more important than what you know. When you know better, do better. These are great. Be flexible.
No, I just gave you some. You're
Do the
good.
best you can do always. You know, something that I really appreciate too is I have heard somebody say once, new level, new devil. And that means kind of as you learn and you grow, you're always going to encounter something more challenging and difficult. And you just have to know that everything you've done until then prepared you for it. All right, so as we're entering these into the session or into the chat, I also want to officially welcome you again to the second session in the 2026 Child Abuse Prevention Month series. I'll say this one more time, but just as a reminder, this webinar series was thoughtfully planned just for you and professionals just like you by the Office of Child Abuse Prevention, known as OCAP, the Child Abuse Prevention Center, the California Training Institute, that would be CalTrin, and Safe and Sound. And every Wednesday throughout this month of April, we invite you to join us for a different session that focuses on a topic that incorporates the theme. And the theme is strong families, strong futures. When we care together, families thrive. So, like I said, this is the second in the session. If you were here for the first session, you can either give me an emoji, a reaction at the bottom of your screen, or say yes in the chat. Who saw the first one? That would be State of the State. Was anybody here for session number one, State of the State? Perfect. Welcome back, Cindy. I see some people saying yes in the private chat. That's great. I'm glad. If you missed it, you can watch it again. So what we have prepared for you is a YouTube playlist that is going to be dropped into the chat. All of the series replays will be kept there, an easy place to access. So this second session is called If Help Had Come First, Lived Experts on Community Pathways. This panel of lived experts will reflect on their own journeys with child welfare system involvement and what kinds of supports might have helped their families before a report or investigation ever occurred. Now, so you know, this panel composed entirely of individuals with lived expertise, and this conversation will focus on the community-based supports that can create community pathways to strengthen families and keep children safe. Now, we are in a meeting format, which means we can see each other, although we will be watching the panel. And I do like to remind you, if we were in a room all together and you had some encouragement, you wanted to give a clap to one of your panelists, you would do that. In a virtual platform, however, you can do that with your reactions. So I'm sure you'll send them love to our moderator and our panelists when we get there. A couple pre-flight checklist reminders for all of y'all. We have prepared an action sheet for this series. That action sheet will be dropped into the chat. When that action sheet appears for you, I want you to know it was designed to help you track key takeaways and whatever your next step is from each session. So make sure if you're using the one from last week, pull it up. If you're going to use this one now, go ahead and click it. You can access it there. It's fillable and it's PDF, so you can save it for the future. You should also know that this presentation is being recorded. A copy of this presentation, along with any resources that are connected to it, are typically available in a follow-up email that is sent out about 2-ish days after today's discussion to your registration email. If you have any AI assistant note takers, just know that they will be gently escorted out of this session because California has privacy laws, y'all. And if you should have any questions during today's panel discussion, the best place for you to house those questions will be in the Q&A feature on the bottom of your toolbar. So if you have thoughts, comments, you want to give encouragement, you can drop that into the chat, but let's keep the questions in the Q&A pod to make it easier to track. At the very conclusion of this session, you will receive a brief survey. That survey will give you access to a certificate that you attended today's session. Now, just as a reminder, this entire series for the 2026 CAP month was thoughtfully planned and designed, each topic with you in mind. And again, we want to acknowledge the Office of Child Abuse Prevention, the Child Abuse Prevention Center, the California Training Institute, which is CalTrin, and Safe and Sound for all the work in putting this together. In advance, we want to thank today's moderator and the panelists for being here today. As you can see, we are now in the second session, April 8th. If you missed last week's on April 1st, the State of the State, you are more than welcome to access that link in the chat. We'll take you to a YouTube playlist. And with that, I would like to introduce our special guest speaker today. I'd like to introduce Hillary Conrad, Bureau Chief of the Office of Child Abuse Prevention.
Good morning. Thank you, Jess. And thank you everyone for being here for our second session in the Child Abuse Prevention Month webinar series. I just want to start out with a couple of reminders that I did share at the first webinar, but wanted to share them again today. And then I will be introducing our moderator and our great partner from Safe and Sound, Kula Koenig. Each year, Child Abuse Prevention Month gives us an important opportunity to pause and refocus on what truly keeps children safe: strong families. When families are supported, connected, and equipped with what they need, children grow up in safe, loving environments where they can learn, heal, and reach their full potential. This month is not about pointing to problems, it's about spotlighting solutions. Prevention doesn't happen in one program or one department. It happens in neighborhoods, schools, clinics, community centers, and in everyday moments. It happens when we reduce stress for parents and caregivers, when we listen to families and tribes, and when we build supportive systems that help early before challenges escalate into crisis. With that grounding, today we're focusing on community pathways, as you heard from Jess. An approach built on the simple but powerful idea that families should have no wrong door to support. Whether they turn to a school, a tribe, a clinic, a family resource center, a faith community, or another trusted partner, help should meet them where they already feel safe. I do want to draw a little bit of a distinction here. You may have heard of the Family First Prevention Services program, and you may have heard of the Family First Prevention Services Community Pathway. This is part of a broader effort. It strengthens existing community supports rather than duplicating them, leveraging federal funding to reinvent and reinvest directly back into communities. Guided by individuals with lived experience, the Family First Prevention Services program emphasizes building an integrated network, one where child and family serving organizations work together to create seamless, sustainable connections. This is the heart of no wrong door access. Community pathways reflect this community-based service array, a network of trusted providers where families naturally seek support, offering a range of services that go well beyond the Title IV-E evidence-based practices and well beyond the Family First Prevention Services program. Together, these pathways remind us that prevention is not a single program. It's a mindset and a culture we build through connection, respect, and community-rooted support. With that, I'm honored to introduce our next speaker. Kula Koenig is the Chief Policy Officer at Safe and Sound, where she leads policy and systems change efforts to strengthen families and prevent child abuse. She brings more than a decade of experience advancing policies that support children, families, and community well-being. Previously, Kula served as a Chief Program Officer at Public Health Advocates, leading the statewide Defend California movement and the All Children Thrive initiative, helping youth across more than 30 cities pass trauma-informed policies supporting children's mental health. She is also the founder of the social justice Politicor, a Sacramento-based nonprofit that builds civic participation and leadership in communities most impacted by structural inequities. A survivor of the Liberian Civil War and a former refugee, Kula grounds her leadership in the belief that policy, prevention, and civic engagement must be inclusive, accessible, and healing. Please join me in welcoming Kula.
Hi, everyone. It's always weird when you are sitting there and people are reading your bio. I'm like, am I supposed to be like, hey, that's me, But thank you, Hillary, and thank you, OCAP, for this wonderful partnership and this series that we're bringing to you all. Again, my name is Kula Koenig. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Chief Policy Officer here at Safe and Sound. Today's discussion is going to be about the community pathway and how we rethink the way that families access support. But most importantly, it's going to be about centering lived experience, about lived expertise, and to informing how these systems can be better. I want to stress something that Hillary said. Again, this conversation is not about assigning blame or revisiting trauma. It is about learning from lived experience to build something better. Something that a supervisor told me once have always stuck with me is the importance of being curious and asking questions. And this opportunity is about being genuinely and humbly curious about what families actually experience and what they actually need. When systems pause to reflect, how well are we serving people? The question comes to mind, have we meaningfully collaborated with people who actually experience the system? I actually want to sit with that question because I asked, how we meaningfully collaborated with people who actually experience the system. And I also want to ask, honestly, were these systems actually designed for families? Or were they designed around families to manage, to assess, to intervene, to surveil? And again, I raise the question not to indict anyone because we're all doing this work and really dedicated. But again, it is about this thing about curiosity, to really ask that question so that we can open the door to build something better. Another thing that I live by is, I don't know if folks are familiar with to go from community engagement to ownership, the spectrum of community engagement. And the spectrum is you kind of ignore, and then you inform, and then you consult, or sometimes tokenize. Then you involve, which is pretty good, but then you get to collaborate, and then you get to defer to. I'm hoping that we can get to a space where we are collaborating and ultimately deferring to those with lived experience. Because I'm a policy person, but the policy analysis alone is not going to bring us to a solution. Again, in the child welfare system, many public systems and nonprofits, let's keep it a buck, I'm part of a nonprofit as well. This kind of partnership, really working with those with lived experience and collaborating and deferring to, hasn't always been what it should be. The conversation today is really important because it's going to shift us from talking about families to learning from families and hopefully building with families. As they mentioned in my bio, I was born in West Africa, Liberia, and there's this a village that really helped raise, my sister, really. My mom had her when she was 18. She had a sixth grade education, and it was really the village. It was the community, the grandmas, the aunties, just the neighbors that were there to help take care of my sister because my mom was young and inexperienced. And when we talk about a community pathway, I liken it to of that village, right? Um, we live in a society where we're all part of this kind of white supremacist society that is focused on individualism and fragmentation. And when you have individualism, it burns people out because it puts everything on you. But if we can have a system, a culture, a village, which is what the community pathway, that's how I think about it, a village where people are resourced, families are resourced to do well, right? That collective care and trusted relationships. Let's design a system that way. And again, this conversation is in that too many families are encountering systems only after a crisis. And us at Safe and Sound, we're working with child welfare agencies to do more and more, right? So I want to ask a question. Poll here. Talking about community pathways. When you hear a community pathway, what does it mean to you? I think we're gonna have a poll come up soon.
And those responses are coming in right now, Kula. We'll give people just a moment to answer.
All right. And I actually didn't hear the term community pathway until I came to Safe and Sound a few months ago, but I've been in this space, but again, I think about it as a village, but I'm curious to see how you all think about a community pathway, right?
We're at about 65% participation. I'll give it a few more seconds here. And remember, this is anonymous. All right, give about 5 more seconds. I will close this poll and share the results. All right, closing now.
Okay, so I'm seeing how everybody else can see the results. A lot of folks share this thing about connecting families to community-based services early. Yes, to prevention, right? To making, trying to say that not having folks go into the child welfare system, but to say there's an alternative to that. Prevention. I see on there also a prevention focused system approach. Exactly. Alternatives to mandated reporting, right? And how can we support people so they don't feel like they have to report? So there's another avenue, there's another pathway, right? And for the folks who are not clear, you're going to hear different perspective as well. And you'll leave this webinar with your own understanding of what community pathways are. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm gonna just jump to getting to introduce our panelists. But again, rich conversation today. We're going to talk about from hearing from our panelists on, what led them to system involvement, what supports might have helped them earlier, and what role community organizations and public systems can play in building a real pathway to support. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. All right, the first panelist I want to introduce is Ms. Keishan Whitmore. Keishan Whitmore is the Community Advocacy Coordinator for California's Far North, Del Norte, Humboldt, and Trinity counties. Keishan Whitmore builds youth-led advocacy and leadership by expanding membership, increasing volunteer engagement, and supporting member-driven organizing strategies. Keishan is a member of the Yurok and Kurok tribes with a background as a youth liaison focused on foster youth and juvenile justice. She brings a trauma-informed, culturally grounded approach to her work and long-standing advocacy for Native rights. Our next panelist is Celeste Chacon, who is a parent mentor coordinator at Support for Families and an English-speaking parent coordinator at SF Kids Collaborative. Celeste is a parent with lived experience in the child welfare system who takes every opportunity to contribute her perspective to help improve information sharing practices for families. Our last panelist is Mr. Roger De Leon Jr. He is a father, grandfather, and assistant minister who has spent over 20 years serving his community through his church and family-centered work. He is an independent instructor and consultant for multiple California universities, training academies, where he develops and delivers statewide training on child welfare, parent partner engagement, and fatherhood. So important. Drawing on his lived experience, De Leon continues to shape policy and practice, ensuring recognition. He has received the 2023 Casey Excellence for Children Award, AA, and participation in the first White House Child Welfare Convening. We have an amazing panel. Let's give him a round of applause or some snaps. Wonderful. All right, let's get to it. So the first question I have for you all is to take us back to a moment when your family needed support and what was missing at that time. Celeste, want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So I have a set of twin girls. One twin is typically developing, and my other twin has a rare brain malformation that impacts her um, globally. And I, I'll take you back to just a little backstory. My twins were very young. They weren't even two yet, and they were in daycare. And I had picked them up, and my twin that has a diagnosis had a limp arm. I was under the impression that it could have been a seizure or something medically that had happened while she was at daycare. And I took her to the hospital seeking care and found out that her arm was broken and there were fractures in both of her legs. Um, that moment should have been the beginning of help. Instead, it became the beginning of investigation and separation. It was one of the most traumatic things that had ever happened to my family. And I walked into the hospital asking for help, and I left without my children. Um, so when I think about if help had come first, I don't think about prevention in a perfect sense. I think about what it would have looked like if the system had responded to me as a partner and a parent in crisis and not a perpetrator.
Wow, responding as a partner and not a perpetrator. I heard that. Thank you, Celeste. Others, Kishan?
Oh, let's for this event.
Kishan, would you like to share?
Yes. So for me, I was originally going to start by talking about my grandmother and how I transitioned from her home, but I realized I we could have had preventative measures a lot sooner than that. My mother was 16 when she became pregnant with me, and she wasn't told about any resources. When she went to Planned Parenthood to ask for prenatal care, they gave her information about having abortions. And I'm thankful that she decided not to, but I was placed with my grandmother instead because my mom was scared to be a mom so young and didn't have the information that she needed. And if there had been services that told her things about like WIC so she could afford child proper nutrition or about parenting classes or prenatal care instead, I think it would have been a lot different. Um, but because of the way things did go, when I was placed with my grandparents, my grandfather had cancer at the time. And so when he became really sick around the age when I was 5 or 6, um, it was a lot of stress on my grandmother, and we weren't receiving any supports. She was grieving and raising a child while taking care of her husband. He had leukemia, so he was developing a lot of tumors in his neck. He wasn't able to eat or drink. And then, so my grandma, because of the extra work she was doing, she was given painkillers and she started kind of depending on them to where she wasn't taking care of me as much as she could. And then when my grandfather passed away, everything became too much for her. And instead of her receiving counseling services or respite or just anything to help lighten the load, I was sent back to live with my mother up in Crescent City, which was at the time about 2 hours from my grandma's house. And she had always been like the biggest supporter in my life. And when I was placed with my mother, just because my mother was older didn't mean that she was in a better situation. And I just feel like if there had been more consistency, follow up, or understanding of what was going on in my situation, I could have stayed with my grandmother or been placed with a healthier, happier mother to begin with.
Thank you, Keishan, for sharing that. What I hear you saying is, again, if there would have been that pause to ask the questions, to see your grandmother as a human being and say, what do you need for your granddaughter to stay with you? How can we support you? Versus just saying, okay, sorry, we're going to move you to your mom who also needed support, right? And so that consistency actually being there, not just, okay, on to the next. And what I heard Celeste say earlier was around, you know, seeing her as a partner, not a perpetrator. And again, it's that thing about collaborating, deferring to, because you know what you need, right? And it's if we're a partnership, there's to help you to get to what you need versus the opposite. So um, thank you for sharing that. Roger?
Greetings, everyone. Looking back at my situation, which happened many years ago, the thing about trauma is that it doesn't go away. And so even though it's been many years ago, every time I speak about it, and I have for many years, I go right back to that very moment where in a moment's time, my family's life was flipped upside down. And so it began with a mandated reporting, and knowing everything I know today, there was a lot of things that were done wrong. And I'm not here to throw shade at anyone. For those of you who know me, you know that I'm right down the middle on both sides. But just looking back of some of the things that was missing, um, the whole investigation was it was wrong. The way it was approached, the accusations that weren't investigated,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
The place that they were actually looking at, right, just was not even my own apartment. It was not our place. And so, as the accusation came in, we didn't even know what it was in the very beginning. I was at work and I was called by my wife, came to my mom's apartment where she was at, saw law enforcement there along with children's services, and realized, wow, this is something's wrong. And they continued to not share with us what was happening. And there were two individuals that were there doing the investigation. So the first thing was that they weren't sharing information with us. They were looking at things, and basically you can see fishing for things. So it was almost like it was already preconceived that it took place without having been told that. And at the time, I didn't understand anything about child welfare. My wife and I were both, just we were actually resource parents at the time for my daughter's half siblings, and we were a week away from adoption. And when all this transpired, and so looking back at that, and just feeling in that moment's time, just the terror of what was about to take place. It was like a nightmare that was coming true that we could never imagine, nor would we want anyone to ever feel. And in a moment's time, I saw my wife being handcuffed and my children being taken off, and just sitting there thinking how much I failed, don't know what I did wrong, and I'll tell you this: a day without your child feels like 1,000 years, and that never goes away. And not to mention that when I was told and promised a phone call to make sure that, especially my daughter, who was the oldest, to make sure she was okay, I never got it. And when I called in, I was told after numerous times of calling to stop calling because I'm too aggressive, right? But how would a parent be able, to just sit there, especially myself being a single father before I met my wife, my wonderful wife, and having my baby girl, for the first 4 years of her life, and having that bond, and then all of a sudden not knowing what's going on. The fact of the matter is, um, I didn't hear from her for 2.5 weeks. And so, you talk about a day, I couldn't even imagine what my daughter was going through. And so that was one of the hardest moments in my life, the impacts of going through this, especially as a father. I was there, I was supposed to protect her, I was supposed to be there. And how in a moment's time you just lose all that power. You feel, just so just useless. You feel like there's nothing in the world that can take this. But I will give glory to my faith, right, in my belief in God in that moment that kept me from going backwards, because I was clean for 5 years and doing things that I wouldn't have, and so there were a lot of things that should have been done. Communication would have been one, knowing who we were rather than judging us by what was there. And the fact of the matter is that as we were, foster parents, non-relative caregivers who have been like 3 years with them, all of a sudden it felt like the whole world turned on us. And even those that we were working with for them through the adoption all told us we can no longer work with you because of the conflict of interest. And so I can go on, but I want to just narrow it down to that because I would say that out of that trauma came the triumph that I get to do and give to families today. So thank you.
Oh, I'm gonna take a moment. I was looking in the chat and regularly said people judging before asking, right? And again, I think that goes back to this thing about this lack of curiosity and seeing you as a partner, right? You said that they had like a preconceived notion. Um, and I am a newish mom. I have a a 2 year old who's really exerting her 2 year oldness, but I can't even imagine, being away from her. And so when you talked about what 2.5 weeks, right? And then you talked about how that could have made you go back, like relapse, right? So there's all this other terror that these things can perpetuate. And so thank you for sharing that. And again, today we're talking about this. We're also gonna talk about how a community pathway and how solutions could be there because we don't want this to happen to any more families, right? That's why we're here. So thank you so much. So I'll go to the next question. If the right support had been available earlier, what would have made the biggest difference for you or your family? Celeste, do you want to start again?
Yes. And again, like I had mentioned earlier, we talk about prevention like it only happens before harm, but for families like mine, prevention also means preventing additional harm from the system itself.
Yes.
Um, for me, the biggest difference probably would have been having support alongside the investigation. We don't have to choose between safety and support, they can happen at the same time. I think a lot of the time, having an advocate with the family, maybe a parent mentor who had gone through it and has that lived experience would make such a difference. Similar to what Roger said, I had no idea what child welfare was, what the system looked like, and everything I knew about child welfare and foster care was through media. It was through movies and how it was portrayed in the media. Um, I also think that there should be a pause and an assessment window before immediately separating children from their caregivers. Not a delay in safety, just intentional decision making. Um, and then accountability across environments. Investigation should be fully included all environments the child is in and not just defaulted to the parent. Um, yeah, those are the top things that I think about.
Yeah. I like that you're talking about, and also I see some questions in the chat. So yeah, keep putting your questions in the chat. I think we also do have a Q&A box. But I see Wendy asking, are there advocacy programs such as that? And so if you want to elaborate on what that is, so we can, kind of get to that later on as well. But I heard you, Celeste, talking about having an advocate, right? And then, investigating other areas as well. And then, being intentional about the investigation, maybe not just immediate removal, but being really intentional about that again, not just checking a box or being reactive, which is, I think, something Roger mentioned too. There was some reactiveness going on there. So thank you for sharing that. Kishan?
Hmm. Could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Absolutely, no problem. The question is like, if the right support had been available earlier, what would have made the biggest difference for you and your family?
Well, For me, I did have a lot of outside supports, like community supports. Like I said, it would have been nice if someone had helped my grandma, but like when I went to school, all of the teachers were kind to me. The local pastor was like one of my closest friends. I had friends whose families treated me like I was another one of their kids. But like I said, then, so the reason that I was looked into by CWS was because one of my teachers sent home a concern, and and I always thought it was the weirdest thing because like my grandma would do my hair in these little ringlets every morning. I actually learned this from her. And like I said, she was going through a really hard time. She was really depressed, and my aunt came to kind of take care of her after my grandpa had passed away from the cancer. And so my aunt tried to do my hair one morning, and she sent me to school with just one curl bang in the middle. And the teacher's like, okay, something has obviously changed at home. And they sent people to check us out, and they thought things were good, but that my grandma could no longer take care of me. And so I was sent to my mom's house. I didn't even know that I would not be coming home. I was sent there with some garbage bags full of my stuff, and I was dropped off, and then nobody came back to get me. And I didn't see my grandma for another 2 years after that. And I feel like with all the community support or relationships that I had, we could have stopped that transition from happening. Um, like even one of my closest friends was my school bus driver, and it was so funny because my mom told me she had the same bus driver growing up. We went to little school, mostly in Native kids, like a lot of them were my cousins, and I would walk myself to the bus stop as like a little 5-year-old kindergartner, and when it would rain, I would stop to pick up every worm to pull out of a puddle. So if I wasn't at the bus stop on time, because I lived really close to the school, the bus driver would come back around to see if they could find me and pick me up. So I always got there okay. Um, but that also made transitioning back to my mom's really hard because I felt like I didn't really know my mom, and she lived with her boyfriend at the time, who ended up being really abusive. And I had two other siblings, and I didn't really know them, and we never really got to connect well. Um, and like I said, so then after that, when we were up in Crescent City, like I said, I had the abusive, um, now stepdad. He ended up going to jail, and then we got moved back to near my grandma, and then I've just been bounced from like family member to family member since then. And like I said, I feel like with all of the different relationships that I had built in that community, especially with like the church and things like that, there could have been something in place to help support my grandma so that I could have stayed there.
Sharon, you're
Sorry for
getting a
getting teary.
it's okay. Oh my God, do not. I'm trying to check myself. So, everybody in the chat, they're appreciating everybody's vulnerabilities as well. And you coming here and you telling your story. And I think, it's okay. Tears are right. Tears are all right. Um, whew. Jasmine in the chat was talking about how you have similar stories, right? And so she's also sympathizing with you. And so there are people who are here and really um, understand what you've been through as well, and giving you support and encouragement in the chat. So absolutely. Um, you started to talk about your hair, and as a Black woman, of like our hair, right? It's a big thing, right? And I don't know how to do hair, right? My hair, right? And my 2-year-old, my sister, she'll be like, my niece hair looking janky. I'm about to come do her hair right now. You don't know what you do, right? So hair is like a big thing, but I think the, again, the teacher, if that additional step would have been taken, right? And not just to say like, oh my God, the hair's not right this one day, right? So that there's something going on again. And poverty, right? Poverty is not child abuse. It's not a reason to put in a report, right? And that's some of the steps that we're changing as well, right? In terms of the recent laws that we've enacted. You also talked about how you didn't even know that you would not be coming home, right? So thinking about what that puts in a child's heart, and like the additional stress as well, being put into an environment that wasn't good, right? But that I also heard people in the chat talk about the importance of grandparent support because your grandma, right? She's there. She's part of the village, right? But she needed a little bit more support. Talk about that bus driver, right? Your mom had the same bus driver. There was community linkages, right? But can we strengthen those linkages, right? And that's the idea around this pathway too. So just thank you so much for sharing that. This village on this call, we got you too. So you can cry if you want. All good. Roger, I'm not gonna leave you out. What you got?
So, looking back, especially of everything that I learned, now because it's been some time. I was actually the first parent partner that was hired for Riverside County Children's Services and helped develop that program some years back before I resigned. And so, looking back though in my personal life, I think what would have helped, knowing what I know today, and even when I came into child welfare, was first and foremost TDM, Team Decision Making Meeting, which is now, CFTs, where we could have had a conversation and sat down, and I could have brought the support along with those who could have vouched for myself, my wife, and my family to be able to have that conversation, to see the support and the changes and transformations and who we really were. Because I really believe that we were judged outwardly. And even with the investigation, looking back, the investigation took place at my mom's house because we saw it in the court report, right? In what was lacking, but yet they were looking at my mom's apartment where it was a 2 bedroom and not ours. Well, we had a brand new 4 bedroom, 2 bath. Every child had a bed and everything going on. So that's one. The other piece that I see that would have been really helpful at the time was education. Um, I'm going to tell you, you know, I was told I thought that child welfare functioned like, criminal law. So I went over and I was like, I need a lawyer. No one told me what was taking place. No one told me what I had to do. And then I went over and looked for legal advice. And so one of the places I went to, because as a father, you're like, okay, so do I have some type of representation? And I went to a place called Father's Rights, where unfortunately they were trying to charge me up front $3,000. And I didn't mention this, but the next day I went to work because I left early. I was fired. Even though I poured my heart out and told them what had happened to me, they still fired me. So now I lost my family, lost my job, and so I'm trying to figure things out. And so they're charging me 3,000 just to talk to someone. And they even gave me a card and had me call right in front of it was a paralegal, and say, hey, see if this friend of mine who's a loan officer for Wells Fargo can give you a loan, knowing I don't have a job, knowing I don't. And so after all that, I left more defeated than when I walked in. It's like, is there any hope? And I finally found a lawyer who was honest enough to explain how child welfare functioned. I think if that education was given, and I do believe it's happening because I'm a part of a lot of different, tables. If parents knew what their rights were and what they can do and how the process goes, right? I think that would be huge. Now, in prevention, it's what parents can be educated on what in the community pathways. Now I'm speaking on the perspective of an individual who navigated the system differently, which is through being a parent partner and all of the tables that I'm at, where I see the changes and transformations, but I also unfortunately see still the lack of education, of support. And unfortunately, as much as I love everything that's happening within California, I was, as a parent partner, I use the family resource centers, right, that were great in helping a lot of families. Unfortunately, there's a lot of families that didn't know or didn't feel comfortable about going into that. And so there's just still this lack of information, this lack of trust that still takes place. And so looking at all that, I mean, that would have done a lot of help for us back in the day, being able to have those meetings, getting to know our support, getting to know the individuals who could have vouched for us. And if there was something that was lacking, right, we could have been, given that information to be able to get it straightened out. So I believe that my child who was impacted and did not get the help she needed, which I found out later, right, who suffered and went through a horrible time during her teenage years, which we were right there with her the whole time. And till this day hasn't been impacted. I think if she would have gotten the help she needed and we would have been educated to ask the right questions and to be able to navigate in the right way, even though I figured it out, there was still a lot of gaps that impacted my family. And so to this day, there are some things that we are still working with my daughter. We're very close, but there are still some things that I wish I could take from her, but I can't because it's deep down inside of her. It's rooted. And so those are the type of things that I look back on and that, I thank God that I'm able to give to other families. This is why I also am a big advocate for the peer support, both in navigating, but also in prevention, as was shared by Celeste, if she would have had a partner walking alongside her to be able to educate her. So I'm sorry, I'm gonna probably jump into the next question, but those are the things that I felt and I feel to this day could have been beneficial for me, back in the day, especially because back then they didn't need a warrant to remove. It was just, we agree, let's go.
I think, like Celeste started saying earlier, that prevention can also mean not making things worse, right? And Roger, you started to talk about some of the ways that things can be like exacerbated, about the economic cost as well, possibly losing your job and then trying to find legal support. And then somebody pushing you to get a loan that you have to then pay an interest on, right? And the importance of educating parents on their rights, right? Like that is so, so important. I'm glad that you also brought up the family resource centers, and some of the things that are happening now are, there's legislation that's to adequately resource family resource centers, right? AB 2441, so that, folks are able to go to the family resource centers and that they are able to be a genuine pathway. But again, that village needs to be resourced. I want to read something that somebody put in the chat. It is Julie. Julie says, it seems like, empathy or compassion is lacking. She said, maybe it's lack of training, maybe it's ignorance, whatever the cause, we have the tools to do better by the people that live in our community. Stop, breathe, listen, and assess. Causing further trauma helps no one. She said, thank you all for sharing. You're making the world a better place by educating us all. So Julie, thanks also for that. I think, again, that's taking a moment to pause. And I started to talk about white supremacy system earlier on. And the part of it is urgency, right? It's urgency. It's being reactive. It's individualism. It's all those things. Can we slow down, be curious, see how we can really support people and thinking through it, right? As opposed to rushing to a solution, which is sometimes what I know what we all want to do is what I want to do too, right? Looking at time, we're doing okay. I have one more question for you all, and I'm gonna, change a little bit. So the question when you imagine a system that responds differently, what does a community pathway actually look and feel like? So that's a question. And I also want to hear you can also talk about the work that you're doing now to create that community pathway, right? So again, what does a community pathway look and feel like? And then you can throw in there some of the work that you're doing now to create that. Who wants to go first? Celeste, calling you again.
Okay. I think a real community pathway would have felt like not being alone in the worst moment of my life. Having someone there to explain things, advocate for me, assisting in slowing things down, and keeping my family at the center, because that was not the experience at all. Um, it just felt like things were happening to me and not with me. And I wanted to know what happened to my child. I was scared and terrified, and there was never a moment for me to stop and pause and think about what was happening to my child. It turned into me doing everything that I needed to do to get my children back. Um, and it's isolating having a child welfare case or being in foster care or anything related to child welfare is such an isolating feeling. And I feel like in a lot of spaces and communities, it's also taboo. So it's like, how do you ask for help? How do you
not feel alone when something is happening to you. So I think community pathway is just, like I said before, having somebody there that has gone through it, that knows it, can make all the difference. Um, and also when families need to feel safe when they ask for help. If asking for help leads to fear, families will stop asking, and that makes children less safe.
Yeah. You don't want to feel judged. You want a trusted partner, somebody who can be there, walk with you, believe in you instead of suspecting in you, right? Um, and I think somebody else also added in the chat is about it's a hug. It could be like a hug from your neighbors, right? A hug from somebody, a partner, somebody walking in this with you, not feeling judged so that you can get the support that you need. So thank you for sharing that. Kishan.
For me, a system that responds differently in the community pathway, what it looks and feels like. I mean, it felt like what I had in my community. I just wish that it had been supported. Um, because like even though I knew my grandma was going through it, things weren't the best at home, she was never like unkind to me. And I loved my grandma and I wanted to be there. And I looked forward to school every day. I looked forward to seeing the bus driver. I looked forward to seeing my principal. I had my grandma get me a Bible because I said I wanted him to go to heaven because he was so nice.
Oh,
Yeah, so I gave him like a little pocket Bible. I like the staff were so kind and welcoming. And I lived in a little community where like, I could if my grandma was having a rough time, and like I said, some might sleep through the day. Didn't feel scared if I got left at school because I was with the people that I loved and that cared about me. And they would wait and they were patient. And I just wish someone had checked on my grandma instead of deciding that she needed to be alone, I guess. So that's what the pathway looked like for me. It was kind of what I had. I just didn't get to keep it.
yeah, you just wanted somebody to invest in that pathway, right? You're like, it's there, okay,
Yeah.
but like the stops are there. Can we build some roads to each stop? You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Like, hey, grandma's here. Grandma just need a little bit of help. I
Yeah.
don't want to leave my community, like you're saying. You're like, I want to be here. I want to go see my bus driver. We could read some Bible verses together or something. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
let's do that.
And like
Let's,
I said, like I had cousins that went to that school that like lived down the road. I could have maybe gone there if
yeah.
that had been set up for me.
Yeah. So there were alternatives, right? Than the ones
Mhm.
that were that they came up with. But maybe if they would have taken again some more time to, as our commenter talked about, is to slow down, to pause, to assess, to ask the
Mhm.
questions, then maybe an alternative solution that would be better fit for you, right? And what you needed, right? Would have
Yeah.
made more sense than a more reactive kind of like action. Thank you. Roger?
So when I imagine a system that responds differently, what does community pathway actually look like and feel like? As I mentioned, the support that we had, I to this day, I would promote it and I really bring it out, and that's the faith-based community, right? First and foremost, I'm really big on, when we're talking with families, looking at where they feel safe. And I know when I went into child welfare, I thought, oh, well, this is taboo. You can't, make certain things. And I realized that wasn't true. And I think that is the most underutilized community. Not to take away anything from, community-based organizations and so on. And I know the difference where it's not pressing something or a religion on anyone, but the support that they gave when I worked for child welfare, they had what they called Faith in Motion, where there were churches that got together and were able to provide for families who were looking to reunify and go forth. Um, I will tell you this, in my day, back when I had my situation, I didn't get any resources. I didn't get support. What I got was my pastors and my church that came in and didn't care what we were being accused of. They surrounded us and gave us the strength to be able to.
Okay. It's all right. We're letting it out. Yep. Okay.
They they believed in us. And I tell you that if it wasn't for them, we probably wouldn't have made it. My family would have been destroyed. My apologies.
It's okay. Hey, remember the same thing we told Keishan, right? We we can let it out, it's a lot. It's a lot. And sometimes you hold it in. It's like, no, it's not good. This is a space.
Yeah.
Do that, right?
And like I said,
Really care.
trauma doesn't go away. So it's, it all comes back. But, I get to give. It's my golden rule. I get to give what I didn't have. I get to provide others. And so the work that I do today, by the grace of God, going through and navigating, understanding social work and how that practice is, going through the teachings and the trainings, going to school and learning all that for the simple fact to educate, parents. But also I learned something about that. And I learned that social workers are human beings as well.
Yeah.
In child welfare, it's a rough job. I worked behind those doors. I saw the hours that they put in. I saw the overwhelmingness. I even had some of them cry to me in moments, as a minister, and just, I saw the human side. And so as navigating through that way, and then of course father engagement, and then being a trainer for FFPSA and so on, and just this navigation that I never thought I'd be in part of, and learning helped me to go all the way up to becoming the mandated reporting to community supporting task force co-chair for the state, for the California Child Welfare Council, whom, Hillary's right here. I worked with a lot of these colleagues, Michael, for the statewide convening, family resource centers, all these places that I get to go in and speak and share a piece of me, not for the sake of putting anyone down, not for throwing stones, but that way we can look at not just myself, but the many other families that I've been working for, and the many voices of mothers and fathers and families that I get to be, that I was a part of, to bring out how we can develop ways to go forward. And I think community pathways has to be well-rounded when we talk about it. When I talk about well-rounded, that includes the whole family, mom, dad, as well as kiddos and the family, right? Maternal, paternal side, but also the communities that are out there that families do trust. And that includes, faith-based communities who step in and who are there where nobody else sees it or hears what's happening, and who bring out this. And I know that for a fact because I'm a part of that, and I've been doing it for many years, and still to this day, I don't look for recognition. We don't look as faith-based community for funding. We do it out of the love that we have. And it's for those of us who've experienced this that we now get to give back. And so I have the privilege of doing it on many different platforms. And so even though I can't go back and change what happened to me, the purpose of every lived expert is how could we give back to avoid the many families that are coming in, even right now, being impacted. So I'll leave that there.
Thank you, Roger. And crying is okay. Someone said crying is coping. I said crying is cathartic. You know what I'm saying? Crying can also be, creative and help you get things out so we can create something better. Right? God, I think what you talked about is your community pathway is something that makes sense to you, right? So if you're talking about from a faith perspective and how the church and the faith community showed up for you, like we need to respect that and pour into that as a resource. If it's the bus driver that's showing up for Keishan, we need to invest, right? We need to invest in who that community is. Like you said, a well-rounded pathway. It is a community that families can trust. So it's saying, for this family, or for Celeste, who is it that you can trust? Who is it? And sometimes maybe it's also that social worker. I also want to give a shout out to the social workers who are out here doing the Lord's work, right? Like you talked about how they're humans too, right? Like they are hearing all this and really being there and supportive, and that they're part of that pathway. And how can we make sure that they're supported and taken care of as well? Just so much love in the chart in the chat. God, this has been such an amazing conversation, and I know that folks probably in the chat have some questions and things they want to share as well. So I want to make space for Q&A. Let me see.
Can I say one
Yes,
last thing?
you absolutely can.
Sorry.
And I was just thinking about it because, especially with hearing what Roger said, and I myself, I have a 5-year-old son now, but being removed from my grandmother has had a lasting effect on me too. I'm terrified that maybe I'll sleep in one day and I don't have time to do his hair,
Oh God, the
or like,
trauma.
yeah. And then I'm just so scared my kids are going to be taken from me. And I'm like, I shouldn't have to live with that fear every day. And I don't want any other kid to have to live with that fear or even have that thought in their head that they're going to lose their kids because they just didn't do something right.
I'm sure there are I'll speak for myself. There are times where I'm like, ooh, Lord, I know I think I said the other day, because I was like, I should could have done a better job as a parent with that, but I was like, I'm tired, right? And I'm like, oh, I was like, I think I'm feeling as a mom right now, you know what I'm saying? And to have kind of that in your head, like, oh, somebody come take my kid, and I think somebody else said in the chat earlier, they were saying how, like, they've been in like CFT meetings, and there's just also, when if your child is taken away from you, that is an emotional, visceral reaction. We want to protect our kids. So of course you're going to come out swinging, right? And it's like, okay, well, how do you have the empathy and the training for that to like get the parent to support that parent? Because yeah, I'm the coming. It's the mama bears for a reason, right? And so absolutely, absolutely. I don't want to be living with that fear, because that's just additional trauma that we don't need. And so hopefully we want to build systems that like help alleviate that, or at some point eradicate that. Um,
Can
and
I
yes,
add one thing too? I'm
you can.
sorry.
Oh, listen, this is y'all's panel. I'm just here. I'm the drop-in moderator. So whatever you want to talk about, go for it.
I just wanted to add on to what Keishan had said, that feeling of like losing your child, like I feel that way more than I should. And it's been 6 years. Every time I take her to the doctor so much because of her disability. And every time we go to the ED or we go to appointments, I am constantly worried. And there's like this hypervigilance that comes along with it of ensuring that it's like, how do we look appearance wise? How am I taking care of her? And how am I showing up in front of these providers and these mandated reporters who can make lifelong impacts on me and my family? It is terrifying. So I just wanted to validate what you said, Keishan, because yeah, I feel you.
We had a meeting with some of our parent leads yesterday, and she came with her daughter. Her daughter's hair was looking so cute, and I was like, her hair is so cute, and she was like, yeah, she was like, I make sure that I have her hair done because I don't want nobody saying nothing to me. She was like, my hair can be looking raggedy, but hers can't. And I can be tired, but I'm not. And it's just insane. Like, that's the kind of stuff that, worried about. And so it's like, how do we take away that judgment, right? And again, that's not equating to child abuse, right? And having that trauma keep being relived, right? Roger, anything you want to add to that? Do you want to weigh in there? Make sure.
Um, I think having these discussions is one thing, right? The only ask I have is that you take back what you've heard from here and many others and really question, where are we at in our agencies?
Yeah.
What are we doing? How are we approaching things, right? Because it's one thing to hear these stories and so on, but it's another when we take it to heart and say, okay, so how could I work with the lived experience, the lived experts, and have those conversations, those even sometimes those hard conversations, that we're not doing this, or we're not doing it enough, or we're speaking it, but there's nothing showing, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that, looking at this and really, individualizing both mom and dad, right? Because I know, being, in this work for a number of years, I've seen great, advancement, but I also see the lack that we're still in, especially when it comes to father engagement or mandated reporting to community supporting. Right, I got a lot of pushback on, oh well, this is this just another fad, and I think that we're in a time where change is right in front of us. I'm a firm believer, as a man of faith, that timing is everything, and there's a lot of momentum happening. But I think the lack of education, once again, of what's coming down the pike, how we can work together, especially with those who are on the ground, both community, families, as well as agency workers, and what is really happening, what's working and what's not working. and how we can proceed together to be able to find the middle ground, because not every backyard is the same.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, something I want to actually, because a theme that I've been hearing from folks in the chat, and then even us discussion here, and even when I open and talking about this white supremacist system, which a big factor of that characteristic of white supremacy is urgency. I'm wondering from everyone, and I'll put this in here, is there something that we could do differently to get everyone to slow down, breathe, and find empathy? Like, and that's if you want to raise your hand, if you are in the part of the audience, you want to share, feel free to raise your hand and put it in the chat. Panelists as well, feel free to, share something, because that's something that it keeps coming up, is like, how do we build it into the system so that it's built in to literally slow down, to find empathy, to ask questions, to be intentional. If that's not the default, we've got to build a system that does that. So how do we do that?
One
I'm
of
like,
the things
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things that I used to share with the task force was that we need to slow down to speed up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that was something that I heard early on in my career, and I started to kind of analyze that. And what does that mean? That means that we have to be willing to slow things down. I mean, if we look and we talk about county time, or any of the agency time, right? That is something that throws out there that it takes some time for it to process. Well, I think also when we're moving and we're doing things, I think it's also good to be able to have those conversations, especially the difficult conversations, to hear everyone. And I know that sometimes it can be very uncomfortable, but I think that's what you know um, everyone is afraid of at times. But I also look at the grace that we should give each other. And what I mean by that is grace to lived experience, but also lived experts to agencies, because this transition is not easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a shift in mindset, and it's a shift in everything else. And I think with our recommendations that we came up with, we were really intentional, even though it went pretty fast. And what's being played out now is because we slowed down to speed up, and because we were intentional in listening and doing the best we can. Not that we're going to solve every problem, but that we can start somewhere. And one of those places is to give grace to each other, right? To know if we're inviting lived experts or lived experience who are starting off, that we give the grace to really pay attention to how we're communicating, because communication, you can be speaking English, but yet two different worlds, and understanding there, not to mention the intimidations that can take place. And this is through the years of, just being in those tables and seeing both sides of things. And we used to joke as parent partners that we spoke parent and we spoke social work, but it was true. It
Yeah.
was true, because you could sit in a CFT meeting and everyone's talking and going back and forth, and tensions are rising, emotions are rising, and they're saying the same thing, but it's two different languages.
Yeah, people aren't hearing each other. Um, yeah, I reading some other things here. People talk about training it to ensure empathy. We need to change the constant need for rush, which creates anxiety and burnout. Slowing down, changing our standards, and like stop the comparisons, right? Um, and providing caseworkers with mental health supports and breaks when they need it, right? Um, I'm gonna keep going. Hiring more child welfare caseworkers. So there are not so many cases per worker. So maybe they have the time to slow down and ask the questions, right? One of my favorite phrases in they mentioned earlier of a nonprofit called the Social Justice Political Corps, and it's the core of I thought of it as like the Peace Corps, where a lot of people are out there doing the work, because many hands make light work. And it's like, in order for us to avoid the burnout, there does need to be more people and more support for the people doing the work, right? And so I see that as something, and I'm a policy person, so I'm like, all right, Mike, I know you're on this call too. So what kind of policy are we about to be pursuing? So anyways, I'm gonna slow down. I'm gonna slow down, because I'm also a very action-oriented person. So I have to also remind myself to slow down. But yeah, so I'm just gonna keep reading, putting ourselves in their shoes, maybe thinking about how we would feel if it were our family. And being able to have empathy means you also have to, yeah, slow down to ask, what if it were me? What if it were my family? How would I want to be treated. If my kid were taken away from me, wouldn't I be flipping out right now? Okay, so how would I want somebody to approach me? But all of that happens when we can slow down. I think it's a bigger issue of counties, agency understaffing, overwhelming demands, right? We have, in my opinion, unrealistic standard and regulations. Cassandra, big facts and big, put in the chat when you get a chance some of those unrealistic standards and regulations that we might want to dig into a little bit more. Some of the policy people and be like, well, we got to change. Celeste, you getting off mute? Did you want to say something?
I was just gonna say, like, in terms of slowing down, I think we live in a very like capitalistic society where slowing down is never rewarded in any aspect. I like when you go to a doctor's office, like a lot of the time doctors have very limited time with you and they need to be quick. When you talk about data and tracking data and output and showing stakeholders like this is how much we're doing with the money you're giving us and so on and so forth. So like in order for us to actually slow down, eh, it needs to be built into the system, into child welfare, into everything because like I said, we're not built that way or what we experience in society, slowing down is not rewarded ever.
Yes. How can we reward slowing down? That's that's a key question that I hope, I mean, that I'm taking away, and that I think we need to, as far as like policy systems perspective, because I had a professor that one time he would also say, what gets measured gets done, right? And so I think it's also in this thing of like, what gets incentivized, right? And so, if we're saying we want you folks to slow down, we need to incentivize that as well and build the system for it. So I 100% agree with that. Um, and then this other one, Michelle says, if every CPS investigator was accompanied by a community supporter, and the community supporter took the lead in making contact with families and learning their story, then the CPS investigators would be considering the communication between the community supporter and the parent's interest, willing to receive support to mitigate allegations, and possibly offer voluntary family maintenance, or be able to see that their intervention isn't necessary at this time. So an advocate, I think Celeste, you talked about that earlier too, having somebody who's an advocate. There's much more in the chat. In ECM, we do a comprehensive assessment. Is this lacking in the CWS? That I'm not sure about. So Wendy has a question. In ECM, we do a comprehensive assessment. Is this
Por
lacking
enfrente, por de-
in the CWS? If somebody wants to answer that, they can as well. Let me see if there's any other big questions that I need to respond to.
So if I just real quickly, the mandate reporting to community supporting as well as the mandate reporting advisory committee that has been implemented, one of the focuses is, prevention work. And one of the things about prevention that is helpful within the child welfare system is that when prevention comes along and there's less families coming into the system that shouldn't be coming in, maybe it's resources that's needed, right? What that does is it lifts the load from cases that don't need to be, taken by social workers, so that way they can concentrate on the families who do need that. So, this is why prevention is huge, as well as this monthly reporting to community support that had taken place. So that way we can lift the load as well for, social workers. Because once again, I worked in social work, or should I say in child welfare, made a lot of colleagues, social workers, supervisors, regional managers, and so on, saw the heavy lift, but also saw a lot of the cases that were coming in that should have never came in. And this was not just me saying them. This was something that was said and shared. And so the overwhelmingness, we know, brings turnout, right? Turnover rates and all these different things. So I got to see it firsthand. And so being able to look at why it's important for prevention and in mandate reporting to community supporting is also for that reason as well. How could we take some of that load off of our caseworkers who are out there being overwhelmed, right? We talk about hiring more. When, we can look at how could we pour more money into prevention to places that families feel comfortable going to, right? Really paying attention to them. So that way that load, right there in the very beginning is being lifted and families don't have to come into the system Because let's be honest, when child welfare comes to the door, even the intentions I understand are good, does not mean trauma does not take place the moment that child welfare shows up at that door or that county car pulls up in the front. It takes place that very moment, right? And so we know that there's a lot that comes out of there, but I'm going to leave it right there. But that's why. That's another reason why, the importance of this, and the pathways is another way of doing that, right? Community pathways and so on. That can, lift a lot of the weight for
Mhm.
our workers who are overwhelmed.
Yeah, I heard you talking about pouring money into places that the families, like feel supported, that are trusted. And again, I think that takes the time to actually assess and understand where families do feel supported, right? So that those are the places where the resources are. I'm curious from the others on the panel, and folks in the chat can respond to this as well. But like, what other places that haven't been mentioned that you think, that you'd recommend as far as places where families can be supported? Or other organizations, things of that sort that you think. Other places, we've talked about, family resource centers as well. I know that's one thing that's come up. Anything else other folks want to bring up? Resources, places. I'm definitely, I know for me, I'm a big fan of family resource centers, and they're in the community, they're trusted. And then also, again, like Roger brought up, around, churches as well. And so I think it is just taking the time to figure out where are families going, right? Where is the places that they're going? Where are the networks, right? And how can we be there to support them? There was a question that came up earlier that I want to make sure we got to, is around education. Somebody asked about what are parental rights. Does somebody want to share a little bit about what that is, or how folks, what the rights they have, or places that families can go to understand their rights, as far as, child welfare is concerned?
So I'm trying to look back and think about where you can obtain it, because it is there, but no one really shares about it. There are some counties, who do have like pamphlets and different things like that they give out. But parental rights is basically the do's and don'ts. And I think that we're looking at that within the state of looking at toolkits and different things like that to be able to develop it. I don't have it on the top of my head, right?
Mhm.
I got so many things right now
I understand.
flowing through this conversation. So, but it's simply just stating that they have rights, right? When a child welfare worker shows up at the door, what they can and cannot do. And I think something that put in the chat. So yeah. So
Yeah.
Cassandra put something in the chat that's very helpful. There's a link. So
Yeah, your rights under California Public Benefits Program. Okay, perfect. Spells that out. So that's a great resource as well. Um, thank you for sharing that. And then something else I was brought up in the chat that Alex Haley said that as a child advocate, one thing I'd advocate for teams to remember is that time moves differently for kids. We do need systems to slow down, to be thoughtful, but we need to ensure that families, are being served appropriately in a timely way. One day, 1 week, 1 year, etc., feels infinitely longer to a young child. Anytime families are separated or children are without permanency is too long. So there's like, thank you so much, Alex, for bringing that up, because, while we're like, we need to slow down and make sure that we're not causing harm, you're also bringing up that sometimes if we're waiting too long, like how much harm is being caused, right? And so it's kind of thinking about that balance, and there's no, I don't know, perfect set formula or whatever, right? And so I think that's the tension. That's the tension. And sometimes you swing the pendulum one way too much, and then, like, then that's where we get into some crisis, right? So we kind of think about how we can really kind of balance that. Also talk about programs that are put into pediatric offices to catch families that could use more support. We talk about the school liaisons as well. Yeah, so we are getting to the end of here, and I want to make sure that I bring us back. So thank you all so much for this rich conversation. Wow, everybody, thank you for your participation. Thank you, panelists, for all that you shared. I have so much to just ruminate and think about. I think some of the things that we really talked about is that we need the systems to provide families what families are saying works for them, and that is going to take building relationships, having empathy, taking the time to assess, but also balancing that, taking the time so that we're not causing additional harm. That, these communities already exist. They need to be resourced. That's something that I also heard loud and clear. So they need to be resourced. The village is here. The village is here. We don't need to create new bureaucratic systems or anything like that, but we need to resource the pathways that already exist. So again, thank you all for being here. Thank you for the opportunity to be curious, to ask questions, to collaborate. The shift isn't going to happen from policy alone. It's going to take us getting together. This series is going to continue. So this was the second one. The next one is going to be on April 15th at 11. It's reimagining mandated reporting. And so that's the next one. We invite you, the information is there as well. We invite you to join. And again, please, you all give yourselves a round of applause. I appreciate you all. Thank you for sharing. And I will turn it over to, I think that's it. I think we're good.
Great. On behalf of today's presenters, and of course, we just want to thank all participants for being here today and want to thank you, Kula, for the incredible moderation, the questions, the kind of helping transition the content into our discussion. And we want to thank all of the panelists today, Celeste, Roger, Kishan. I know I saw it come through in the chat. And you probably, I hope, felt that love as well. How grateful we are for your transparency and your honesty, willingness to share. And as Kula said, the very next session that we have available for you is next Wednesday, same place, same time. You can register on the link on the screen. You'll also receive information in a follow-up email. I do want to also remind you that if you want to watch a recording of this session or even the last session that has happened, that information will be available on the YouTube playlist, which we can drop one more time into the chat. What you will see on the screen will be dropped a couple of times is a brief survey. If you are looking for a certificate of attendance to add to your collection, we highly recommend that you take this brief survey that we are dropping into the chat, and you can access your certificate of attendance at the end of that. With that, thank you all so much, and we will see you next week.